Secular Nation. Secular Nation. Atheist Alliance of America.
Secular Nation. Atheist Alliance of America.
Hello and welcome to the Secular Nation podcast. I am your host, Tim Brannon.
And I'm your eternal sidekick, Michael X.
Later on the show, we'll be talking to Katherine Stewart, author of The Good News Club, and the other subtitle that I didn't memorize.
I think it's a stealth assault of the Christian right on America's children.
Okay.
I'd be shocked if I got that right, but that's what it is. So the Good News Club is not good news.
Anyway, so we've had some news since our last podcast. The Pope has resigned.
Once a pope, always a pope? Or
yeah, I don't know how that works, but, I, for one, I gotta congratulate that guy. Being able to, quit that dead-end job, because I think this Ratzenberger guy, he was destined for better things.
So beyond infallibility, he could be even more infallible, or a game show host, maybe?
Maybe. He should start a blog. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, maybe we can have him as a podcast guest.
That's possible. He's. I don't know if he's up to our caliber of guest.
So you think it might be a hostile interview?
No, I'm saying I don't know if he's. I mean, he's good. I don't know if he's Secular Nation podcast good.
This is true. We need to have standards on this in this organization.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, something I actually wanted to talk about in this podcast is a phenomenon I've noticed within debate circles of apologists and creationists is what I like to call Cargo Cult Intellectualism.
Cargo Cult.
Yes. Now, if just for a little background on this, the Cargo Cult was a phenomenon that was in World War II in the Pacific Theater, where our forces were taking over these islands, and we were constructing airstrips and supply depots. And there were natives on these islands who, up until that point, had never even seen any kind of modern technology like that. In their eyes, we sort of constructed these things, and the gods were sending down these huge metal birds that were dropping off this magical cargo, which was full of food and technology they'd never seen before.
So you're pre-literate, and suddenly these amazing beings and creatures are coming and giving you stuff.
Yes. So that gave them the idea, hey, we need to get this stuff. Let's build our own airstrips. And so these cultures in these islands, they actually built miniature airstrips with control towers just made out of bamboo, and the radios made out of coconuts with headsets and microphones.
So their own iconography.
Yeah. The whole idea, they were sort of mimicking what they thought the other people were doing as like a religious ritual in order that the planes would come down to them. And in a lot of ways, I kind of see this in a lot of creationist debate tactics, is that they will take on the guise of the intellectual arguments of their opponents in thinking that will actually help them, but it'll just demonstrate their own ignorance in this. Like, I think the best example of this whenever you watch whenever you watch a debate of a creationist or with a skeptic or whatever, a lot of times they will make an accusation that the skeptic is committing some sort of logical fallacy. But in doing so, they'll demonstrate that not only is the person not committing that fallacy, but they have no idea what the hell that fallacy is.
So in other words, science and critical thinking are coming to them on metal birds from the sky, and they think they've figured it out.
Again, I kind of see this internal mechanism in their head almost like, skeptics and whatnot, they talk about logical fallacies when they debate, and they seem to be winning debates, so all I have to do is say logical fallacies, irrespective as to whether or not I understand them, and that'll magically make me win debates. It's sort of thinking, just basic logic as something magical. At least, I mean, that's how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a similar perspective in that what I think it is they almost see belief as an identity card rather than as something that you work with. And so science is just an identity you put on, or critical thinking. So by saying, oh, well, you're committing a logical fallacy, they haven't even really understood what that is. And they can just say, aha, but I have this get out of argument free card.
Yeah. I had a debate with a person online a few weeks ago in which.
Tim, are you debating with people online?
Yes, I do it. Well, like, it's in a forum, so there's usually other people debating alongside me, but.
Well, you're fighting the good fight.
Yes. At the same time, I was debating with this person on the second law of thermodynamics. He was kind of kept throwing that out, and I actually had to ask, how is that really even applicable? Because I've done, a lot of research on this, and by that I mean I've Googled it, which is more than most creationists have done.
That's a step above.
And I'm not a physics guy, but I know the basic clause has to do with a closed system, and the Earth is not a closed system. And I was trying to explain that guy, and the person was saying, "Well, it doesn't matter, the sun's heat and radiation, because the sun's heat and radiation, that is entropy." The only way to decrease entropy is by having complex organic creatures acting as a Maxwell's demon, and again, I'm listening to this. It's like this person has no idea what the hell they're saying. It's like they skim the Wikipedia page and are just grabbing little things like Max. I actually know what Maxwell's demon is. I don't have time to get into that, but it's not what he's saying. It's that was merely a thought experiment.
Right. I mean, my favorite counter argument to that second law one is, well, if you really, then you also believe that childbirth, active gestation, is also against the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah, well, again,
so you've therefore disproved babies.
Yeah. And this extends beyond that, just in the whole creationist movement, is they are sort of creating their own cargo cult when they have their creation institutes of creation scientists, quote unquote, who, they put on lab coats, and I don't even know they have labs to do anything, but again, it's...
Well, you saw that video that used a stock lab photo behind one of their creationists. So they caught that. So they said, well, no, we actually do have beakers. We just thought it was a prettier picture.
Yeah, and then they're also trying to create their own peer-reviewed journals.
Yes.
It's, again, it's okay, we have labs, we have peer-reviewed, so that will make us right somehow,
Well, I got an interesting letter from somebody saying...
Oh, really?
Yeah, one of the first proselytization letters I've gotten in years. And what I think is funny is that the extent of her argument, it's called... is Jesus Christ alive and active today in the 21st century? And I won't bore you with it because it's not the usual nutty letter that's actually fun to read. But the crux of her argument is that Christ said in Matthew 24:14, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come." So her argument is that because he predicted that his beliefs would be carried on into the future, that therefore he predicted the future, and therefore we need to be worried about the end times, and he was God. And I was trying to think, how many religions do you know of where the prophet said, you know what, people won't give a shit about what I say years from now, so let's just live today? Other than Aleister Crowley. Isn't that kind of the basis of any religion, is that people are going to care about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's standard self-fulfilling prophecy right there.
Right, yeah. So, oh well. I don't think she'd buy that argument anyway.
Earlier this week, we spoke with Katherine Stewart, author of The Good News Club, The Christian Right's Stealth Assault on America's Children. And yeah, it was a really great conversation. The book is astonishing. One word of warning is that we had a little technical difficulty, so your amiable sidekick, myself, had to carry the very end of it, had to fly solo briefly. So never mind any dropouts at the very end, but it's a pretty great interview. Enjoy. Hello, well, we're here with Katherine Stewart, author of The Good News Club, The Christian Right's Stealth Assault on America's Children. Hello, Katherine.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you are a journalist. You've written for New York Times and The Guardian, and you've written this book. So, well, why don't you just tell us generally what this book is about?
Well, the book is about an organization called the Child Evangelism Fellowship, and it's they put good news clubs in public elementary schools around the country. Good news clubs are after-school programs of religious proselytizing and indoctrination. They call themselves Bible study, but they're really not about studying the Bible. They're about indoctrinating very young children in a fundamentalist form of the Christian faith. They are installed in public elementary schools. We're talking grades K through 6, and they focus on the youngest children. The centerpiece of their program is called the Wordless Book, and it's used to convert children who are too young to read to this form of the Christian religion. And these wordless books have no words, just pictures and shapes. And I got interested in good news clubs because I was living in Santa Barbara, California, and my daughter was a kindergartner in public elementary school. And a good news club announced that it was coming to our school. Look, my first thought was, they call themselves Bible study, and it was an after-school program. So at first I thought this was no big deal. I'm a strong supporter of the freedom of speech, and I also happen to think that the Bible is worth studying, even in public schools, from a non-sectarian standpoint as history or literature or even anthropology. But I started to hear stories from parents in town whose kids went to schools where good news clubs had been established. And I started to hear about how kids attending the clubs were targeting their peers for faith-based bullying and bigotry. I knew a little girl named Zoe, and she was approached on the playground by her fellow kindergartner, Ashley, who said to her, "You don't believe in Jesus, so you're going to go to hell." She had figured out that Zoe's family was not Christian, and so she figured, well, I had better go tell her that she's going to go to hell. And Zoe said that's not true. And the teacher overheard the exchange and decided to use this as a teachable moment. So different people have different perspectives on these issues. Different religions have different perspectives on these kinds of issues. Now, Zoe was fine with this. Well, Zoe was completely okay. But the problem was with Ashley, the girl attending the Good News Club. She started sobbing hysterically, and she said, "I know it must be true because they taught it to me in school, and they don't teach things in school that aren't true. How can they lie to us in school?" Now, remember, we're talking little kids here. For them, no institution has as much authority as the public school. The school for them has a kind of cloak of authority. They think if it's taught in school, it must be what the school wants them to believe. So this story basically gets to the heart of the problem with good news clubs. I don't have a problem with kids talking about religion with their friends at school, but I do have a problem with Ashley believing that those particular beliefs are sanctioned by and supported by her public school.
So they're deliberately trying to sow confusion in the kid's mind, but if they can't specifically speak in a public school and proselytize in a public school, they can make it look like they are to the kids.
Well, they are actually speaking in the public school. They're proselytizing in the public school. But they, convincing 5- and 6-year-old children that a particular religion is sanctioned by their public school is not just an unintentional byproduct of their activity. It is precisely the point. They use an awful lot of different kinds of deceit. And I want to give you a couple of different examples of the kind of deceit that they use. A lot of good news clubs do a number of things to reinforce that false impression among the kids that the school is supporting their religion. Some good news clubs use the school's own staff to act as good news club teachers. Others have the good news club teachers volunteer in the classroom during the school day so the kids will think that they're part of the school. Some good news clubs put up posters in the school hallways. I've heard from parents who say that good news club teachers enter their children's classrooms to set up before the bell rings. One mother said that the good news club teacher would even do a roll call for the good news club, thus basically, in effect, segregating the children by religion. Now, all of those things are designed to make little kids think that the club is part of the school. Now, here's another level of deceit, and it has to do with how they represent their beliefs. They systematically make an effort to present themselves as broadly Christian with non-threatening labels like non-denominational and interdenominational. These labels are just effective marketing tools for them. Most of the activists I met with the Child Evangelism Fellowship believe that most Americans who call themselves Christians really aren't, including U.S. Episcopalians, United Methodists, Roman Catholics. The list goes on. And of course, they categorically reject legitimacy of all other faiths. Free thinkers are enemy number one. Now, I want to read something that I encountered when I was at the Child Evangelism Fellowship's National Convention. And I went to they have all these seminars on trying to convert kids from all these different populations. And there was a woman named Claudia Calderon. She was the head of CEF's Spanish ministries. And she was giving a seminar on how to convert children, from Hispanic families. And she said, they call themselves Christians. The priest told them, you're Christians in this church. It's a very fine line. When the children tell me that they're Christians, they say they're Christians because they are born in a Catholic family. And then how, she goes on to explain, can we make the children understand that being devout Catholics means that they're not the right kind of Christians? She said, one thing to remember when you're talking to them is don't discredit the Catholic Church, at least not at the beginning. So I think calling themselves non-denominational and interdenominational is a kind of deceptive marketing tool and lulls a lot of parents into thinking that what the kids are getting is a very sort of mild and inclusive form of Christianity, and in fact, they're getting something else. Now, I want to say that the deceit doesn't end there. They also practice deceit in advertising. Just this past week, a 7-year-old from Woodward, Pennsylvania, brought a flyer home. Her dad told me about it and said that the flyer said nothing about the kind of religion the Good News Club teaches. It instead offered prizes, balloons, and yummy snacks and promised the parents that the club will teach their kids how to behave. And the quote there was, "We work hard to help your children make choices that will help them succeed in life." And then in capital letters at the bottom of the flyer, it said, if your child, all caps, if your child cannot attend the club, please call the school. So this deceptiveness of the seeming opt-out clause, I think, is astonishing. I think seems like it's intended to intimidate parents and make them think that the Good News Club is required, or at least strongly favored by the schools. Now, all of this raises the question, what are the kids getting in the schools? What are they getting in Good News Clubs? And I would really like to speak for a moment about the kind of religion that the Good News Club teaches. Is that okay?
Yeah. Actually, if I could interject something just about, there's a couple things, because one of the things I looked at was some of these deceptive practices, and I looked at some of the newsletters from local Good News Clubs, and there's one from Tennessee that also speaks to a different kind of deception, which is this is from the newsletter of the school, not from the Good News Club. So the softball team and other clubs have little blurbs, and for the Good News Club entry, it says, "Attention parents, please wait at the end of the hallway for club to end. Students will be brought to your location at the conclusion of the club. If it is an emergency, you may walk down and retrieve your child." So in other words, they don't want parents to come in and see what's going on in the class.
That sounds like hostage procedure.
It's really kind of astonishing. And I think if a lot of parents knew about the extremism of the Good News Clubs, they actually wouldn't send their kids. I heard from a lot of parents who told me that they sent their kids to the club thinking, they'll just learn to sing Kumbaya and love their neighbor. And then the kid comes home and says, first of all, they're not getting anything like that. But then the kid come home and said, "Mommy, Daddy, we're going to go to hell because we don't go to the right kind of church." And I've heard from other parents. Another woman told me that, she's like, well, I was, had some religion, but, I don't want to be bothered to go to church, so I'll send my kid, and then she can get it in such a convenient setting. But the children are actually being indoctrinated into a very deep kind of fundamentalism. So, and if I can speak to that for a moment, I would love to. There's an independent 5-year study of the 5-year cycle of the Good News Clubs. The Good News Clubs produces these booklets. They're curriculum materials, and I have to say that they're taught in every single Good News Club, coast to coast. There's a 5-year cycle with lesson plans written for every single week, and the lesson plan covers every Good News Club minute by minute, and there's no room for spontaneous interpretations or anything like that. and no room to deviate from the party line. Now, this independent study identified over 5,000 references to sin, 1,100 references to obedience, 1,000 references to punishment, and 250 references to hell. And by comparison, that same 5-year curriculum only included 2 or 3 glancing references to the Golden Rule or the Royal Law, which is never loving your neighbor as yourself. So here's the second weekly lesson in a standardized series of lessons of the Good News Clubs. You remember, you guys might know about the story of the Amalekites, Saul and the Amalekites in the first book of Samuel.
Yeah.
Oh, it's our favorite.
Yeah. Actually, I've debated that one endlessly.
You know, this is the thing. It's one of these very challenging Old Testament stories. I'm sure it can be interpreted very many ways by biblical scholars. The Israelites are having some trouble with their neighbors, the Amalekites, and God orders Saul to exterminate all of them, including the children and the babies. Saul does his best to carry out the deed. He kills off the women, the children, the babies, and most of the animals, but he saves the king and a few little bit of livestock. So according to the scripture, God is outraged by Saul's failure to execute the order in full. And this story is a tough story because it has a history of showing up when one sectarian group has set its sights on eliminating and exterminating its rivals, Rwanda and Northern Ireland being only 2 of the many examples. I spoke with biblical scholars about this who say, yes, the Puritans used it. It's been used in different ways in the Middle East. It's a very concerning Old Testament story that has been used, to justify a lot of bad things. But the relevant point here is that the Good News Club thinks that this is the story that should be brought to the attention of 5- and 6-year-old children in public schools. And the lesson the Good News Club wants to teach is quite clear. If God gives you the order to kill everybody, you must do it to the letter or you are committing the sin of disobedience. Now, the Good News Club manual, which I have in front of me, specifies that teachers are instructed to say to the kids, if only Saul had been willing to seek God for strength to obey, but he didn't. Saul knew what God wanted him to do, but deliberately disobeyed by keeping King Agag alive. And then here, Saul should have been willing to seek God for strength to obey completely. And here, in 3 separate places, it says teaching statement. Have children shout, God will help you obey. And here, this is on the next page. Teaching statement, shout, God will help you obey. And further down the page, at the other end of the page, teaching statement, have children shout, God will help you obey. So you see, the fundamentalism is so deep, and there's an emphasis on obedience at all costs. So it's no surprise that when I attended the National Convention of the Child Evangelism Fellowship, keynote speakers were ranting against the so-called homosexual agenda, promoting creationism, which is actually taught in the public school, in Good News Clubs in public schools. One of the keynote speakers had co-written a book with Ken Ham, the noted creationist. I'm sure you guys know who he is. And in that book, he referred to interfaith marriage as interracial marriage and said it should be condemned.
That's 2 bigoted birds with 1 stone.
So in other words, they're teaching and say, don't be a slacker, kill all the heathens, not just a certain number of them.
Mm.
Yeah, the Nuremberg defense is God's way.
How did you get? Were you sent these flyers in Tennessee, or do you have contact with parents who were concerned about the Good News Clubs in their public schools?
No, I consulted the almighty Google and found a number. In fact, I also found some good stuff on our local New Jersey CEF. The CEF page has not updated in a while, but there are some telling testimonials from people who are leading CEF organizations. One of them was a flyer I found from a group in New Egypt where the head of the group is a teacher herself, and the flyer itself contains many misspellings and grammatical errors, which I found equally maddening, but that's another story. But there was, here's an example of the kind of stealth evangelism. They're very careful on their websites about not admitting that they're trying to create a wedge between the wall of separation, to mix my metaphors. But here's a teacher who teaches a New Jersey Good News Club. I often wondered, as a stay-at-home,
who would I be able to share the gospel with? And I praise the Lord that he has given me this opportunity to be a witness in a public school to these little children. Because we meet in my daughter's school, and my daughter has had so many of her friends come to GNC, I believe it has enabled her to be bold with God's word. And it goes on, but I mean, this is, certainly much more of an implicit admission that this is what they're trying to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's interesting that she talks about her daughter being bold. One thing that a lot of the different initiatives by religious extremists in public schools have done, including Good News Clubs, is that they recognize that there are certain things adults are not allowed to do. For instance, adults really are not allowed to walk into a public school and hand out Bibles. But if you can get the kids, if you can hand a box of Bibles or religious tracts to a child and the adult instructs that child to hand it out to every other child in the school, well, then it's legal because it's protected as student speech. And of course, students should have the right to speak, freely amongst themselves about religion as they have the right to speak about anything else. But this kind of adult initiated and organized religious activity using children to do what adults are not allowed to do is something that's a favored tactic of the religious right. One of the movement leaders calls it a God-given loophole. He says that this, quote, brilliantly threads the separation of church and state loophole.
Very scary. So
Yeah.
Now, I guess, there's just a million questions, but one of them is, so the CEF is obviously not a grassroots organization. They're funded from outside, correct?
Oh, that's absolutely true. The CEF, the Child Evangelism Fellowship, is actually an international organization. They have presence in nearly 200 countries worldwide. They have 19 different ministry schools where they teach people how to convert little children to their form of religion. And I'm holding in my hand, we're on Skype, so I don't know if you can see it. It's called The Plan, The Essential Guide to Church Partnership. This is 400 pages of tabbed material covering every single aspect of establishing a Good News Club in public schools. They've got adopt a school Good News Clubs, print and send legal letters, everything scripts for the visit to the superintendent, how churches can partner with Good News Clubs in public schools, and the Good News Clubs will function as kind of a marketing tool to get to route families into their churches, basically through the children. You get the children, you tell them that they're going to go to hell unless they believe in Jesus as we understand Jesus, and you got to go to church, but it's got to be the right kind of church, a quote-unquote Bible-believing church. So to go to church, and I know what church we should go to because my Good News Club teacher told me, or something like that. So that's one of the reasons why churches get so involved with this, is because they think they can get, all these families in, and the way to get the families in is through the kids, and the way to get to the kids is through the public schools, and by confusing those little children into believing that the religion of the Good News Club has the authority of the school and the state.
And so they target within a 414 window, as they call it.
Yes. In my research, I started going to mission festivals, festivals for missionaries and missionary conventions. Like any other business, like the, say, spa products business, they have their conventions where you go off to Las Vegas and you see what's new, and there's a lot of, business to business conversation. People talk, what's the direction of the spa products business? Well, the missionary world, the world of evangelical mission, is just the same. They have their own festivals and conventions where everybody gets together and talks about the state of evangelical mission. So I started to go to these missionary festivals, and what I discovered was quite interesting. There is a focus on children that there hasn't been for a long time, forever, really. There's a new focus on kids. It used to be the world of evangelical mission focused on something called the 1040 window. That is the area between 10 and 40 north longitude in the globe, where they would call them unreached people groups, where the most cultures are that have not heard the evangelical gospel. So thousands of missionaries were dispatched to Africa and Asia and the Middle East. And if you look at the globe, you'll see that most of those areas fall between 10 and 40 north latitude. Well, and the guy who actually articulated that strategy was named Louis Bush. He's a very high-level mission strategist. He's sort of a big-picture thinker. Well, it turns out in 2009, he decided it was time to formulate a new strategy, and he called it the 414 window. This is his book here. It's called The 414 Window, Raising Up a New Generation to Transform the World. It has become a seminal book in the world of evangelical mission. And he has this graph in the book that shows the ages at which people become Christians. And he identifies through a graph that 85% of people who solidify their identity as evangelical Christians do so between the ages of 4 and 14. And he said, most people who make a decision to follow Christ will do so before their 15th birthday. So I want to read you something from the introduction to the book. He talks about the 414 window, the bullseye, the very heart of what he calls the harvest. And he says, every major movement in history has grasped the need to target the next generation in order to advance this agenda. Political movements like Nazism and communism traded legions of children with the goal of carrying their agenda beyond the lifetimes of their founders. Here it reads, even the Taliban places great emphasis on recruiting children. Even the Taliban, they talk about the Taliban here. And then the introduction is concluded with this rallying cry, may God inspire you to join us in his battle for little ones. So in the missionary world, it's no longer part of the world that matters, it's age. And in fact, this ethos was articulated by some of the keynote speakers at the National Convention of the Child Evangelism Fellowship. I went to their big, triennial convention in Alabama, in Talladega, and one of the keynote speakers was a fellow named Matt Staver. He's the founder and president of Liberty Counsel, which provides Good News Clubs with a lot of their legal cover. And he gave this very rallying speech. He said, this big, sort of rallying cry speech where he talks about children as strategic machinery. I'll see if I can read you a couple of excerpts from his speech. He said, he just talks about, he said, those children are the most strategic age group that we have. So I thought that was kind of astonishing that, there's this deliberate focus on children that is, it's not accidental at all. And I thought that was really interesting. Okay, here he says here, if you want to change the face of the planet, you want to focus on those children ages 5 through 12. It is the most strategic age group that we have. And I thought that was really interesting. He said, if we're in times where there are disastrous moments, we're 24 or less years away from exactly the opposite. And that is the difference in this transition group of leaders. 2 generations of K through 12, that is all it takes. If you want to change the direction of where we're going, you focus on the youth. So I thought, for them, reaching kids in public schools is, very deliberate. They really want to change the face of the planet, as they say, and they want to do so by getting those kids in public schools.
What would you say is the real harm, though?
Well, there's different levels of harm. The first harm is that there's harm to our constitutional principle of the separation of church and state. Look, our founding fathers inserted, gave the very best piece of real estate in the Constitution. The very first clause of our very first amendment is the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. This is a clause that is interpreted to prohibit government endorsing or funding of religion. And what Good News Clubs are doing is they're forcing us to subsidize and promote their religion by using the public schools. I mean, I think when any government institution is used and exploited by a religious organization, that's prohibited in the Establishment Clause. So I think it's an enormous harm to the constitutional principle of the separation of church and state. Another layer of harm has to do with, frankly, I think, personally, the kind of religion that these children are being taught. I don't want to ever be in the position of judging somebody else's religion, but if you don't want me to judge your religion, don't put it the one place that I am bound to see it, which is in my kid's public school. The third kind of harm, I think, is the deceit that goes on. They're deceiving people into thinking that they're one thing when really they're not, and they're deceiving small children into thinking they're one thing when really they're not. And those children will not all be turned into evangelical conservative Christians, but it is very effective at deceiving children into believing that there is a, quote, right group in society, one that has all the answers and is affiliated with the authority of the state, and a wrong group in society, one that does not have that privileged position of having thousands of clubs in their public schools. I want to point out that there are thousands of these clubs in public elementary schools. I think the latest figure is over 3,500. Their presence in public schools has grown 728% over the last 10 years. And when I was doing my research, naturally, I was like, well, do other religions do this? So I called all kinds of religious denominations, other Christian denominations, Jewish groups, Muslim groups. I called the head of PR for the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, and tried to figure out who else is doing this. Well, it turns out that other than maybe one or two people who are doing it in a very kind of ad hoc way, nobody is doing the same thing of going into elementary schools and setting up their proselytizing operations there, and with this sort of layers of deceit that are being used. And the most, I think, the biggest harm, the part of the clubs that was the most upsetting to a lot of parents is that the teachers explicitly tell children to go out and recruit other kids. At every Good News Club training I attended, kids were offered points or prizes for recruiting their peers to the club. And I want to say, I think a large harm, one of the biggest dangers of groups like the Good News Club, is that they harm public education as a whole. When one particular sectarian group goes in and commandeers the public resource, the public school, for the promotion of their agenda, other members of the community naturally withdraw their support. And they withdraw, in many instances, I spoke with parents who withdrew money from the PTA. They stopped donating money to the school. They stopped donating man hours to the science fair and things like that. And support for the public school wanes as a whole. And public schools are more than just bricks and mortar. They're community centers. They're places where we set aside our, political ideology and our religious background, our ethnicity, and come together in support of our children and their future. And I think public schools are under attack as it is, and they don't have the resources to defend themselves against these kinds of predatory religious organizations. Public school employees are not trained to kind of mediate the kind of needless religious wars that erupt in their communities when these kinds of groups enter the system. And so I think there's a lot of different kinds of harm that happen when Good News Clubs force their way into public elementary schools.
It reminds me a lot of that, the old meme about religion acting like a virus. In this case, it's almost acting like a parasite on its host and doesn't even care if the host survives the infestation. That if the legal fees required to throw the group out cost the school community so much money that they wind up closing down other clubs and the like because they had to get rid of this organization.
That's absolutely true.
So, what is our course of action on this? What can be done about these organizations?
There's a lot that we can do. I think the first thing is that people can't begin to face their challenges unless they even know what's happening. So I think it's really important to learn about what's happening in your public schools or public schools near you, and to educate others about this movement in our midst, and to educate people about the extremism that's at the heart of Good News Clubs. I think that school administrations and school boards have a great role to play in creating policies that do not favor the Good News Clubs over other clubs, and that make very clear that the Good News Clubs are not sponsored by the public schools. but even more than that, into introducing the kind of anti-bullying programs into public schools that will mitigate some of the harm that's done. And these anti-bullying programs should specifically address issues of faith-based bigotry, so that when kids are deceived into believing the Good News Club favors a particular religion and use that misperception, that that misleading information to try to bully their peers, those kids and others can step in and say, that's bullying and that's not okay. But beyond this, I'd really like to see a policy, a progressive policy, a legal policy pursued from a progressive point of view that reestablishes some of the basic constitutional principles that have been eroded since Good News Clubs have been, started exploiting public schools, that recognize the coercive effect of the clubs on small children, and also that basically reaffirm some of these Establishment Clause concerns that have been eroded. I mean, one of the things I have to say, on the legal strategic side of things is, these groups have argued that what they do is just free speech. So they define it as speech when they want it to be protected from discrimination, but they call it religion when they want to be exempted from the law. Religion is not just a speech like any other, according to our legal system. Our legal system treats religion very differently than other kinds of speech. Religions have protection that other groups simply don't have. They get significant tax privileges to the tune of an estimated $145 billion over the last 10 years, according to Reuters. They get all sorts of exemptions from the law. They don't have to adhere to employment anti-discrimination laws, and they're allowed to engage in discriminatory practices that get other non-religious groups banned from campuses and government institutions. Now, these special privileges, according to religion, are why religions should be kept separate from government institutions like public schools. And that's why the framers of the Constitution put the Establishment and Free Exercise Clauses together as the very first clause of our First Amendment, separate and distinct from the Free Speech Clause. See, I think that these religious groups that are in the public schools, they're trying to have it both ways. If they're religion, they get to have all these government freebies and handouts and exemptions. But if they're just speech, then we have to be consistent about the benefits that they're accorded. Otherwise, we're favoring them over other forms of speech. As the situation presently stands, they're trying to have their cake and eat it too.
There's a great quote in the closing of your book where you say they don't want toleration; they want the opportunity to practice their intolerance.
Yes, I think that that's true. They would like to exploit the toleration of others in order to preach and practice their own intolerance.
Now, this you also mention in the book something about the Success for Kids organization. So this isn't just a Christian evangelical movement necessarily.
Well, it's really interesting. There are a few other religions that insert other types of programs in the public schools, many through the rubric of so-called character education. And, we were living in Santa Barbara. We moved to New York City, and I was shocked to discover not just one, but two separate religious initiatives in our public school in New York City. One of them coming from an evangelical perspective, and another one coming from the Kabbalah Center. And it was a character education program that, they were supposedly teaching kids about character. And somebody from the Kabbalah Center, they were running this program called Success for Kids. It used to be in public schools, about maybe a dozen public schools, mostly in New York and Los Angeles. By the way, that program has been shut down since. I think they're under investigation by the IRS right now. But they were entering the school purportedly to teach about, character and these useful topics. But as I could see looking at their curriculum, what they were really doing is, I felt that there were some of the religious principles of the Kabbalah Center that were being taught to our children in public school as part of the normal school day. And I found this quite shocking. Now, this reminds me of the Kabbalah Center was doing this. Most of the groups, not all of them, but most of the groups that do this are coming also from the evangelical side of Christianity, although there are some, the Scientologists used to do it as well. I think they've been shut down. But these groups come to schools ostensibly with programs to teach about drunk driving and bullying and things like that. But it becomes quite clear, as it did to me, that once they're in the school, their main aim is to make kids think favorably about their form of religion, and basically, in many instances, to leave with a collection of young religious converts. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on faith-based sex education, which really are teaching myths rather than facts about sexuality. And they advance this very narrow idea of what constitutes an acceptable moral life.
Well, it's funny because Madonna is part of that Kabbalah group, and so we've managed to anger the Christian God, but look out, this podcast has taken on Madonna.
Yeah, again, it's so passé anyway.
It was so interesting to me that that there was that Kabbalah Center program in my in my public school. And
one of the things that I appreciate about the book is that it's not the usual evangelical freak show that must be very tempting to write. That a lot of these people seem very human, like the individual. He was just also on the documentary that was on PBS, The Revisionaries, Don McElroy. He seems like a sweet old guy. He's totally wrong, but you can kind of appreciate his sincerity even as he's doing, pretty much ruining the textbooks in this nation, for example.
Yeah, I found in my research, I really liked a lot of the folks that I met who work with the Child Evangelism Fellowship. Some of them extended an awful lot of personal warmth to me. We had some great conversations. A lot of the people who support the initiatives that I disagree with are very nice people, and I think they mean well for the children that they're teaching and the communities in which they're working. But unfortunately, I think all their good intentions are being used and exploited in service of a national agenda that's going to erode our communities, cause division in our communities, and harm public education as a whole.
So the road to heaven is paved with bad intentions or good intentions. You also mention, for example, some of the role of David Barton and some of the kind of evangelical view of history being put forward as kind of a background to some of this.
Yes, as I noted in my chapter about the Texas textbook wars, there was a sort of far-right faction on the State Board of Education that was determined to advance what some people call a Christian nationalist version of American history. And in fact, David Barton, who is a known fabricator of quotes from the Founding Fathers that no credible researcher or historian has been able to actually find.
Unless you look in Louis L'Amour novels, apparently.
Exactly. So he was actually an advisor to that group.
Well, Catherine, it sounds like we had a little bit of a technical glitch, and Tim got dropped off the call. But just wanted to thank you for being on the podcast. It's very enlightening and frightening to hear more about these organizations. We often get set up in arguments about prayer in school or prayer before community town hall meetings, but this is one that I think would be new to a lot of people who are concerned about the separation of church and state.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the program, and I really appreciate all the important work that you guys are doing.
The more we know, the more we can do to fight this kind of thing. So thank you. Thanks.
And if anybody is interested in learning more about my work, my website is www.thegoodnewsclub. And I'm on Twitter at Kath S. Stewart. And I do encourage everybody to watch this documentary. It's called Sophia Investigates the Good News Club. It's about 30-minute documentary and really has, they're in their own words. You can see what they're all about.
This is the Secular Nation Podcast, signing out.
Yeah, it's a Secular Nation.